You know, sometimes life feels like it is finally giving you a moment of peace. That was exactly what I thought I had when I moved out of the city and bought a property that had its own lake. Not some little pond, not some shared body of water with a community dock and 1,000 restrictions. No. I'm talking about a private lake sitting right on the land deeded to me. It was a piece of heaven. Every morning I could look out the back porch and see the mist rising off the water. I could fish in it. I could paddle across it. I could even just jump straight in whenever I felt like cooling off. And the best part, nobody could tell me what to do with it because it was mine. Or at least that's what I thought until a woman who I can only describe as a nightmare in human form showed up. People around here call her a Karen. And trust me, she fits that title like it was tailored to her. At first it seemed harmless. She lived in the neighborhood across from my property. Now mind you, I am not in their neighborhood. My land is separate. There is no homeowners association attached to my deed. I made sure of that before buying. I did not want to be part of the endless rules and power games that come with an HOA. But Karen, oh, she thought different. The very first day she saw me dragging a kayak to the lake, she came marching over like she was leading an army. She had this look on her face like she was the sheriff of the county and I was some outlaw trespassing. She didn't even introduce herself. She just barked out questions. Do you live here? Do you know this lake is under HOA regulations? Do you have the proper stickers to use watercraft? I just stared at her for a moment, wondering if she was serious. Then I explained calmly, "Ma'am, this is my property. This lake is on my deed. I own it. It is not under any HOA. You don't have any authority here." She didn't like that answer. Not one bit. You would think a normal person might realize they were mistaken and back off. Not Karen. No, she doubled down. She started showing up at the edge of my property, arms crossed, glaring while I fished. She yelled across the water when I swam laps, telling me I needed a life vest by HOA rules. She even went as far as snapping photos of my guests when they visited and dared to dip their toes in the water. At first I laughed it off. I figured eventually she would get bored and move on. But what I did not realize was that this woman lived to control others. She had nothing better to do with her life than patrol imaginary borders and invent violations. One Saturday afternoon things really escalated. It was one of those perfect summer days. The sun was hot, the water was cool, and I decided to take a long swim across the lake. I had just made it halfway when I heard this shrill whistle. I turned around and sure enough there was Karen on the shore waving her arms like she was guiding airplanes. She shouted something about being in violation of HOA codes. I ignored her and kept swimming. That must have driven her nuts because by the time I got back she was waiting near my dock with a clipboard. She actually had printed papers. She shoved them at me like she was serving court documents. On the top it said HOA violation notice. I almost burst out laughing. I asked her, "Are you out of your mind? I don't belong to your HOA. You cannot fine me for swimming in my own lake." But she stood there smugly and said, "We will see about that. The HOA has jurisdiction over all water usage in this area. You'll be getting a fine in the mail." Now at this point I had two choices. Ignore her nonsense or confront it head on. I decided to wait and see what she would actually do. And sure enough, about a week later an envelope showed up. Inside was a formal-looking letter with HOA letterhead. It claimed I owed $500 for unauthorized swimming and failure to follow water safety protocols. I just sat there shaking my head. The audacity. I thought maybe it was just a scare tactic. But Karen was dead serious. The letter threatened additional fines if I did not pay. It even hinted at liens against property. That was when I knew this was not going away on its own. I contacted a lawyer friend of mine to look it over. He nearly spit his coffee out when he read it. He said they had no legal standing whatsoever. Since my property was not under their covenant, they could not enforce a thing. He told me to sit tight and keep records. So that is what I did. Every time Karen came snooping, I documented it. Every bogus letter they sent, I kept it. Because deep down I had a feeling this would end up in court. And honestly, a part of me wanted it to. The next few months were a war of attrition. Karen kept escalating. She would stand near the lake with a measuring tape, claiming I was encroaching on HOA land. She actually called animal control once because I let my dog swim in the lake with me. When that failed, she called the county claiming I was polluting the water. Each claim was investigated and dismissed because again it was my lake, my property, and I followed the law. But Karen did not care about the truth. She cared about winning. And when she realized her scare letters weren't making me pay, she convinced the HOA board to file a lawsuit. Can you believe that? They actually filed in small claims court demanding payment for thousands of dollars in supposed violations. When I got served those papers, I will admit for a split second I was nervous. Court always sounds intimidating. But then I reminded myself I had the facts on my side. I had the deed. I had all the evidence. And more importantly, I had a stubborn streak that matched Karen's. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. The weeks leading up to the hearing were surreal. Neighbors whispered about it. Some secretly rooted for me, others avoided me because they didn't want to get on Karen's bad side. She strutted around like she had already won. She even bragged that I would be forced to pay and maybe even be banned from using the lake altogether. I didn't rise to her bait. I just kept gathering my notes, meeting with my lawyer, and waiting for the day when the judge would finally hear the truth. And oh, when that day finally came, it was something I will never forget. But before I take you into that courtroom with me, let me explain just how far Karen went in her campaign against me, because the level of obsession this woman had will blow your mind. She started sneaking onto my property. Yes, you heard that right. More than once I caught her tiptoeing near the shoreline, snapping pictures of my dock, measuring distances. When I confronted her, she claimed the HOA had authority to inspect common property. I had to remind her again that nothing on my land was common. She stormed off muttering about rule breakers and freeloaders. Another time she called the sheriff because she said I was endangering the community by inviting friends to swim. When the deputy showed up and I showed him the deed, he just shook his head and told me off the record that they get calls from her all the time. Every stunt she pulled only made me more determined. I was not just defending my right to swim. I was defending the principle that bullies like her cannot push people around. And the more ridiculous she got, the more confident I became that a judge would see through it. By the time the court date rolled around, I had a binder full of evidence. Photos, letters, maps, even witness statements from neighbors who had seen her trespassing. Karen meanwhile showed up in her usual dramatic fashion. She had stacks of HOA documents, binders of rules, and a team of board members sitting behind her like they were a jury. She smirked across the aisle at me as if this was already settled. I sat there calm. Because I knew the storm that was about to hit her when the judge asked the one question that would unravel her entire case. And that, my friend, is where the real showdown began. Now the morning of the court hearing felt heavy. I woke up before sunrise, nerves buzzing, but not because I thought I was going to lose. No, it was more the anticipation of finally putting an end to months of harassment. For the first time, the truth was going to be laid out where Karen couldn't twist it, where her smug attitude wouldn't carry any weight. It was all going to come down to facts, deeds, and the law. I put on a clean suit, nothing flashy, just something that said I respected the process. I remember looking in the mirror and saying to myself, this is it. You're not just defending a lake, you're defending your freedom from bullies. I gathered my binder full of documents and headed to the courthouse. The building itself was a tall brick structure with an old clock tower, the kind of place that seemed to hum with history. As I walked up the steps, I noticed Karen already there. She was flanked by 2 HOA board members, both clutching folders like they were going into battle. She wore a navy blazer, hair sprayed to perfection, and that trademark scowl fixed on her face. When our eyes met, she gave me a little smirk, the kind that said, enjoy your last free swim because after today you're mine. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I just nodded politely and kept walking. Inside the courtroom, we both took our seats. Karen and her crew on one side, me and my lawyer on the other. The room was quiet except for the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from someone in the gallery. I could feel eyes on us. Local cases like this always drew curiosity. People love a good drama, especially when it involves the infamous HOA and their queen bee. Finally, the bailiff called us to order. Everyone rose as the judge entered. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a calm but firm presence. You could tell he had seen it all before, from petty squabbles to serious disputes. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the docket. When he called our case, my heart thumped a little faster. This was it. The showdown. Karen's attorney, a younger man who clearly had been roped into this circus, stood up first. He started with a dramatic opening about community standards, safety, and how every resident must abide by the HOA rules to preserve harmony. He spoke about how I had repeatedly violated these rules by swimming without authorization, inviting guests, and operating watercraft without permits. He waved around copies of the HOA handbook like it was the Constitution itself. The judge listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but his face gave nothing away. Karen, meanwhile, sat there with her arms crossed, nodding along as if every word was gospel truth. At one point she actually leaned over to whisper corrections to her attorney, which the judge noticed and didn't seem to appreciate. When it was finally our turn, my lawyer stood. He was calm, collected, the exact opposite of Karen's fire and brimstone performance. He opened with one simple statement. Your Honor, the defense will show that my client does not and has never belonged to this HOA. Their claims of jurisdiction are unfounded, their fines unenforceable, and their harassment unwarranted. Then he pulled out the deed. A single piece of paper that carried more weight than all of Karen's binders. He handed a copy to the judge and explained, "This document clearly shows that the property in question, including the lake, is owned solely by my client. It is not subject to HOA covenants. There is no easement, no shared ownership, no recorded restrictions tying this land to the association." The judge leaned forward, studying the deed carefully. He asked, "So to be clear, you're saying the HOA has no legal authority over this body of water whatsoever?" My lawyer nodded. "That is correct, Your Honor. None." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty on Karen's face. She shifted in her seat, lips tightening. But of course she wasn't about to give up that easily. When her turn came, she practically leapt to her feet, asking the judge if she could speak directly. Against his better judgment, he allowed it, probably out of curiosity. She launched into a rant. She said the lake was part of the community's ecosystem, that residents relied on it for aesthetic value, that her property value was at stake if I was allowed to treat it like a personal playground. She claimed it was common sense, that all land and water in the area must fall under HOA rules, even if the paperwork didn't spell it out. The judge raised an eyebrow and interrupted. "Mrs. Karen, this court is not here to enforce common sense or personal preferences. We are here to enforce the law. Show me where, in any recorded document, this lake is listed under HOA jurisdiction." She froze for a second, then stammered about implied covenants and community agreements. The judge cut her off again. "Ma'am, implied covenants are not binding unless recorded. Do you have a recorded covenant tying his property to your association?" Her silence said it all. My lawyer seized the moment. He pointed out that not only did they lack authority, but their repeated fines and harassment could be considered intimidation and trespassing. He laid out a timeline of every bogus notice, every unwanted visit, every baseless report. He even had affidavits from neighbors who witnessed her behavior. By this point the judge's expression had shifted. He was no longer neutral. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man realizing his time was being wasted by someone who had mistaken personal vendetta for legal standing. Karen, sensing the tide turning, grew desperate. She interrupted, she raised her voice, she accused me of being a danger to children in the community. She even claimed she saw me dumping chemicals in the lake, a complete fabrication. The judge banged his gavel and warned her to control herself or risk contempt. That moment was priceless. Seeing her sputter, cheeks red, realizing her power was slipping away, it was like watching a balloon deflate. Still, the judge gave her one final chance. He asked plainly, "Do you or do you not have any legal document proving jurisdiction over this man's property?" Her attorney shuffled papers, whispered in her ear, and finally admitted, "No, Your Honor, we do not." And that was the nail in the coffin. The judge leaned back, sighed, and said, "Then this case is dismissed. Not only does the HOA lack jurisdiction, but their repeated actions border on harassment. I am strongly considering sanctions." You could hear a pin drop. Karen's mouth hung open. She looked like someone had yanked the rug from under her. For me, it was a rush of relief and vindication all at once. Months of stress, months of being treated like a criminal for swimming in my own lake, and finally a judge had said out loud what I had known from the start. They had no power over me. But the story doesn't end there. Because what the judge said next turned the tables completely. He didn't just dismiss the case. He opened the door for me to go after them for damages. And let me tell you, that changed everything. When the judge leaned forward after dismissing the HOA's ridiculous claims, I thought it was over. I thought he was just going to bang the gavel, send everyone home, and I would finally be free to enjoy my lake without Karen breathing down my neck. But then he paused, looked directly at me, then at Karen, and said something that made the entire room shift. He said, "This court cannot ignore the pattern of behavior that has been presented here. Not only was this case baseless, it appears the defendant has suffered months of targeted harassment. I am granting him leave to file a counterclaim for damages." For a moment the words didn't sink in. Damages? Against the HOA? Against Karen? I blinked and looked at my lawyer, and he gave me a little nod. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about winning. This was about turning the tables. Suddenly Karen's smug little crusade wasn't just collapsing, it was about to cost her. The judge scheduled a follow-up hearing to consider my counterclaim. He wanted documentation of the stress, the time wasted, and any financial costs I had endured. Karen, who just seconds ago had been shouting about imaginary chemical dumping, was now pale as a ghost. She tried to protest, saying it was unfair, that she was only doing her duty, but the judge shut her down with a glare that could freeze fire. When we walked out of the courtroom that day, I swear I could feel the shift in the air. Neighbors who had been afraid to even wave at me now stopped me in the hallway to whisper good luck. One even patted me on the shoulder and said, "About time someone stood up to her." Karen, on the other hand, stormed out with her board members trailing behind like whipped puppies. She was fuming, muttering about appeals, about corruption, about how nobody respected authority anymore. But no one was listening. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of my life. On the one hand, I finally had peace at home. No more bogus violation letters, no more trespassing, no more screaming across the lake. On the other hand, I was preparing for another courtroom showdown, this time with the chance to finally make her pay. My lawyer helped me put everything together. The stack of violation notices, the legal fees I had racked up, the affidavits from neighbors, even the recordings I had made of her yelling at me while I swam. We built a case brick by brick, and with every piece my confidence grew. By the time the follow-up hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast. People wanted to see if the great and terrible HOA Karen was finally going to face consequences. She walked in wearing the same blazer, but this time there was no smirk. Her attorney looked tired, like he hadn't slept. My lawyer and I sat calmly, binder ready, waiting for the moment. The judge opened the session and asked me to present my claim. My lawyer did most of the talking, laying out the timeline, showing how Karen and the HOA had knowingly overstepped, how they had weaponized fines that had no legal basis, and how they had caused months of stress. He pointed out the wasted resources of the court system, the repeated false reports to authorities, and the trespassing on private land. Then he gave the number, $15,000. That was what we were seeking in damages. The gallery gasped. Karen almost fell out of her chair. She jumped up, shouting, "This is extortion. He's trying to profit off the community." The judge banged the gavel and told her to sit down. When it was her turn, she tried to spin herself as a victim. She said she was only protecting property values, that she had been acting on behalf of the neighborhood, that I was the one being unreasonable for refusing to cooperate. She even tried tears at one point, claiming she was being persecuted for volunteering her time. The judge wasn't buying it. He cut through the theatrics with one simple question, the same one that had sunk her case before. "Mrs. Karen, did you or did you not have legal authority over this man's property?" She tried to dance around it but finally had to admit, "No, Your Honor." And with that, the gavel came down hard. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only did he dismiss the HOA's nonsense once and for all, but he ordered them, and specifically Karen as their representative, to pay me $15,000 in damages. $15,000. I couldn't believe it at first. The gallery erupted into whispers, some people smiling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen sat frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. It wasn't just about the money, though. Let me tell you, that check felt sweet when it finally cleared. It was about justice. About knowing that bullies can be beaten, that persistence pays off, and that the truth matters. Karen, on the other hand, lost more than just money. Her reputation in the neighborhood crumbled overnight. People who had once followed her around like she was queen of the HOA now avoided her like the plague. Some even openly mocked her. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the difference immediately. For the first time since I had moved in, I could swim in my lake without feeling eyes burning into me from across the shore. I could have friends over without worrying about someone snapping pictures from the bushes. The harassment stopped cold. Karen disappeared from my property line. Word got around that she had been voted off the HOA board. Turns out, even her loyal supporters had grown tired of paying for her obsession. And you know what the best part was? One evening, as the sun set over the lake, I sat on my dock with a cold drink in hand, listening to the frogs and crickets. The water shimmered gold, calm and peaceful. I realized that this was what I had wanted all along. Not revenge, not a courtroom battle, not even a check for damages. Just the simple right to enjoy what I had worked for without interference. And I finally had it back. As for Karen, the last I heard, she put her house up for sale. Maybe she couldn't stand the embarrassment, maybe the neighbors pushed her out, or maybe she just couldn't stand to look at the lake knowing she had lost. Whatever the reason, she was gone and peace returned to the neighborhood. Looking back, the whole ordeal taught me something important. People like Karen thrive on intimidation, on making others feel small, on convincing you that they have power they don't actually have. The moment you stand your ground, the moment you shine a light on the truth, their entire act crumbles. It takes patience, it takes resilience, and sometimes it takes a courtroom, but bullies can be defeated. So now, whenever I dive into my lake, I think about that day in court. I think about the judge's words, the sound of the gavel, and the look on Karen's face when she realized she had to pay me $15,000 instead of the other way around. And I smile. Because sometimes, just sometimes, justice really does make a splash. And that's how it all went down. From being fined for swimming in my own lake to walking out of court with $15,000 and finally some peace. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life showdowns like it, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment sharing what you think about HOA bullies, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support means the world, and trust me, the next story will be just as wild.